The hospital called on a Tuesday afternoon when I was sitting in my kitchen in Tucson, eating leftover rice, and trying very hard not to think about the fact that my grandson was 4 days old and I had never held him. The woman on the phone was professional and apologetic, the way hospital billing departments always are when they're about to ruin your day. She said my name, asked if I was Robert Calloway, and then told me they had a financial responsibility form on file with my signature and that the insurance claim had been denied. $8,500. The delivery bill for my daughter-in-law, Vanessa. She said the form clearly showed I had volunteered to cover it as a gift to the new parents. I hadn't signed anything. I was on the road when those forms were submitted, somewhere in the dark on Interstate 80, watching Iowa disappear behind me in my headlights, calling forward to a moment I had waited months to reach. I know exactly where I was, because I stopped for gas outside Des Moines at 11:28 that night. The receipt is still in my glove box. I keep it there. I put the phone down on the kitchen table and sat very still for a long moment. Not rage, not panic. Something colder. A gear I hadn't used in 3 years. 27 years with Chicago PD's Financial Crimes Unit leaves marks on you that retirement doesn't erase. My wife used to call it my detective face. Whatever it was, it came back in about 45 seconds. I want to tell you something before I go any further. I need you to understand who I am, because this story changes completely depending on who is telling it. I am 61 years old. I have a bad knee, a rescue dog named Porter, and a yard in Tucson that is losing a slow but determined battle against the desert. I am a grandfather who actually cried when my son Derek called at 6 in the morning to say the baby had arrived. 7 pounds, 4 ounces. They named him James, my middle name. When Derek said that, I had to put the phone down for a second and stand at the window looking at nothing until I could speak again. Not because I was sad, because some things are too large to speak into without pausing first. I am also a man who spent 27 years watching people construct financial lies. I know the shape of fraud, the way a doctor knows the shape of illness, the signature, the rhythm, the specific confidence that looks almost like innocence if you've never sat across from it in an interrogation room. On that Tuesday afternoon in my kitchen, I recognized every single sign. Let me take you back 3 weeks, because that's where it actually began. Vanessa called me herself. That alone should have been my first signal in 4 years of marriage to my son. She had always let Derek carry the relationship with me. She called on a Wednesday evening, and she was warm, practically glowing through the phone. She said the baby was coming any day. She said she and Derek wanted me there. She called me Robert instead of Mr. Calloway for the first time. I noticed it, filed it somewhere in the back of my mind, and then let the excitement of becoming a grandfather push the file into a drawer and lock it. I should have left it open. I packed everything I thought a first-time grandfather should bring. New clothes, a stuffed bear with a music box in its chest that played something old and soft. A card I spent an embarrassing amount of time choosing at the CVS on Grant Road, something that said what I couldn't quite manage to say out loud, that I was proud of Derek, that I was ready for this, that I could not wait to know this new person who was going to change everything. I booked a hotel 3 blocks from Northwestern Memorial. I told my neighbor I'd be gone a week. I drove 16 hours through 2 states with my back aching, and my heart doing something ridiculous in my chest every time I thought about what was waiting on the other end of that highway. I stopped twice for gas and coffee. Both times, Vanessa answered Derek's phone when I called to check in. Both times, she told me to drive carefully, that they couldn't wait to see me, that I was going to love him so much. I believed every word. I pulled into the hospital garage at 1:48 inches the morning, 16 hours in the car. My hands were stiff on the wheel, but I was there and that mattered more to me than anything else. I walked into the maternity ward and told the receptionist I was the grandfather, and she smiled at me the way people smile at grandparents in movies, and she told me room 312. I floated down that hallway. That is not an exaggeration. There is no other word for what my feet were doing. Derek was pacing outside the delivery room. When he saw me, his face did something I will not forget. Not relief, not joy. Something closer to a man caught between 2 fires who cannot choose a direction. His shoulders did not drop when he recognized me. They rose. He said, "Dad, what are you doing here?" I stopped walking. Vanessa invited me. She called me. She said you both wanted me here. Derek's eyes moved to the delivery room door. then back to me. He looked exhausted, no sleep, adrenaline wired, the specific haggard look of a man who has been watching someone he loves go through labor, and he still looked guilty. She changed her mind. She wants it to be just us for the birth. You understand, right? No. I did not understand. But I was 61 years old, and exhausted from 16 hours of highway, and I was too stunned and too tired and too unwilling to be the difficult father-in-law to fight for something in a hospital corridor at 2 a.m. So I said fine. I said I'd go to the hotel. I'd wait. I watched my son's shoulders drop with something that looked very much like relief that I was leaving, and I walked back down that hallway, and the floor felt very solid under my feet this time. Honestly, even now, I struggle with the version of me that walked away. I made myself small so that nobody would be uncomfortable. I turned myself into a ghost and called it being respectful, and Vanessa knew I would do exactly that. She had 4 years of evidence that I would. I think she counted on it, and planned the whole sequence around it. James Robert Calloway was born at 9:50, 3 inches the morning. Derek called at 10:15, voice exhausted and happy, that specific combination that only exists in delivery rooms and at finish lines. He told me the name. He told me the wait. He said maybe give them a day or two before I came to visit. Michelle needed rest. A day or two became 3 days. 3 days became the morning I drove to the hospital and found out they had already been discharged. Gone. No call. No text. No message of any kind. I stood in the maternity ward lobby holding a stuffed bear with a music box in its chest, and I was 61 years old, and I had never felt so completely erased from something that was supposed to be mine. I called Derek. He apologized, distracted, already on the other side of something I hadn't been included in. He said Vanessa needed her own space, her own rhythm with the baby. Maybe next month things would settle down. Next month. I packed my hotel room in under 40 minutes. I drove back to Tucson with the bear on the passenger seat. And somewhere around the New Mexico state line, the hurt began to change into something else, something quieter and more analytical, something that 27 years of building fraud cases had wired into me below the level of conscious thought. Something was structurally wrong, not just hurtful wrong, the way families can be hurtful with each other. Wrong the way a case is wrong with a shape to it, a sequence, a deliberate architecture. Why invite me at all if you didn't want me there? That question rode with me all the way home. The hospital called the following Tuesday. $8,500. My signature on the forms, submitted electronically at 11:47 p.m. On the night I was behind the wheel in Iowa, white-knuckling through a rain squall on the interstate. Nowhere near a computer. Nowhere near anyone named Vanessa. I asked them to email me the documents. I was off the phone in 3 minutes. 20 minutes later, I was staring at a financial responsibility form with my social security number, my address, my handwriting or a facsimile of it close enough to fool a hospital intake system, all arranged neatly on a form stating I had volunteered to cover the delivery as a gift to the new parents. The timestamp was clear. The form was clean. The fraud was clean. My hands were completely steady when I picked up the phone. I called Harlan Oates. Harlan had been my partner in Chicago PD's fraud unit for 11 years before he made detective, and he had a gift for pattern recognition that was almost supernatural, the kind of memory that could connect 3 unrelated insurance claims from 3 different states by a detail so small. You'd need a microscope to see it. Without him pointing, I told him what I had. I asked him to run a background check on Vanessa Calloway, née Martin, born approximately 1993, Chicago area. He called me back in 4 hours. He said, "Robert, sit down." The social security number Vanessa had been using since before she married. Derek had belonged to a woman named Vanessa Marie Martin, who died in a car accident in Missouri in 2020. No surviving family. Someone had been living her life for the past 3 years, building credit, filing taxes, getting married under a dead woman's paperwork. My daughter-in-law didn't exist. I want to stop here for a moment, because I need to be honest with you about what that information felt like. This wasn't abstract. This wasn't a case file. This was the woman who sat at my Thanksgiving table. Who called me to say my grandson was coming and I was going to love him so much. Who answered Derek's phone on the interstate and told me to drive safely. That person had no legal identity. That person was a construction, built on a dead woman's documents, operated by someone I had never actually met at all. 3 years of family dinners and Christmas calls and birthday texts, and none of it had been real. Some things, when they break completely. I called Donna Reyes next. Donna had gone from Chicago PD to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division 6 years ago, and was sharp enough that I still called her first, whenever something complicated crossed my desk, or in this case, my kitchen table in Tucson. Hypothetically speaking, I said, someone marries into a first responder family, spends a couple of years building access, then commits fraud across state lines. What are we looking at? She was quiet for 2 seconds. Then she asked if this was about my family. I told her everything. She called me back the next morning. They already knew about the network. 6 operatives, working under a man named Victor Huang, a former financial consultant who had essentially turned fraud into a franchise. The operational model was always the same. Identify a first responder's family. Send in an operative to establish a romantic relationship. Get married, harvest the financial access. EMTs. Police officers. Firefighters. People with steady incomes, strong credit, and family members who extended trust as a default. Phase 1 was financial fraud. Phase 2 was life insurance. Phase 3 was disappearance. Donna told me they had found insurance applications in Vanessa's name, substantial policies, on herself and on James. Let that sit for a moment, please. My grandson was 5 days old. Someone had already written an insurance policy on his life. I set the coffee mug down on the counter. I did not throw it. I did not raise my voice. Porter was asleep across my feet. The Arizona sun was coming through the kitchen window like nothing was wrong anywhere in the world. I sat with that information for approximately 90 seconds, and then I picked up the phone and started building a trap. I called Derek that afternoon. I told him I had good news. My old colleague Jack Merritt had passed away and left me a substantial sum, $75,000. I was thinking about a trust fund for James. Maybe help with something bigger the new parents needed. Could they come down to Tucson Saturday? I wanted to see my grandson properly. There was a pause, muffled voices. When Derek came back on, his voice had changed lighter, eager. He said Vanessa actually felt much better. They could absolutely come Saturday. He had no idea. Not a single idea in the world. I spent the next 4 days building the set. Hidden cameras in the living room and kitchen, linked to an encrypted server in my study. Audio recorders on 2 separate frequencies. Fabricated documents, bank letterhead, a notarized estate summary, a printed will professional enough to convince someone who had never sat across from a fraud investigator. 3 retired colleagues from my old unit agreed to be parked on the street outside with direct lines to Donna. She had 2 agents positioned 2 blocks away. Harlan had a unit watching Derek's Chicago apartment in case Vanessa decided to run before Saturday. Saturday arrived with clear October light and a dry Tucson wind. I made coffee at 6. Checked every camera twice. Let Porter out into the yard. Stood there watching him chase something along the fence line, and I thought about James, about a baby who had no idea what was being built around him, who was just new and warm and entirely, completely unaware that someone who was supposed to protect him had turned him into a line item on an insurance policy. That thought anchored me through the whole morning. They arrived at 10:20. Derek's Honda pulled into the driveway. I watched through the living room window as they got out Derek with the diaper bag, Vanessa stepping out carefully, holding the carrier, and then I saw him for the first time. James, wrapped in a blue blanket, face tucked sideways, a small fist curled near his cheek. I opened the door before they knocked. For the next hour, I was just a grandfather. That is the only word for it. I held James and talked to him quietly. I told him his middle name was mine, which made him very important and should be treated accordingly. I watched Derek watch his son with the pure, uncomplicated joy that fatherhood gives people before they learn all the ways it can be complicated. I set the table. I poured coffee. I was present in a way I hadn't been in weeks because there was finally something worth being present for, sitting in my arms, weighing 7 pounds and knowing nothing. Vanessa circled the room, noted the furniture, noted the framed commendations on the study wall. She was extraordinarily good at absorbing information with the practiced casualness of someone trained to read a room in under a minute. She smiled when she caught me watching her. I smiled back. It was about 40 minutes in when she made her move. Casual, almost offhand, the way a professional makes their approach when they want it to look spontaneous. Derek mentioned something about an inheritance. I set down my coffee cup. 75,000 from Jack Merritt. Good man. We worked together for a decade. I paused, just long enough to let the number land. I want to invest it in James's future. I watched her eyes. Just for a fraction of a second something moved in them. Something fast and calculating, a shutter opening and closing. Then the warmth flooded back in, performed and perfect. She said they had been thinking about a house. A yard for James to grow up in. The down payment would be around 45,000. If I could help at all, even 20 or 30,000, it would make such a difference. Every word was on camera. I said I would love to help. I said I would need their financial information for the trust lawyers, bank statements, account numbers, routing information, all of it, standard documentation. She said of course. She could email me everything that night. She didn't even hesitate. After they left, I stood in my kitchen and listened to the house settle around me. I thought about the bear still sitting on the mantel. I thought about how James had grabbed my index finger with his whole fist while I was holding him, with the total unconscious grip of someone who has never had a reason not to trust. I thought, I am going to make sure he grows up not knowing any of this happened. I called Donna. She said they were already monitoring Vanessa's phone. By Tuesday morning, Vanessa had called a man matching Victor Huang's profile, described the inheritance, and together they had attempted to wire transfer $75,000 into an account number I had fabricated specifically to route into a monitored FBI account. On Wednesday morning, the transfer attempt was flagged. By 11, Vanessa, whose real name turned out to be Carla Ann Prentice, with a record in 3 states for identity fraud, was arrested at a coffee shop 2 blocks from Derek's apartment, while confirming the transfer with Victor Huang. Donna's agents took both of them simultaneously. Victor Huang's operation had been running for 4 years across 5 Midwestern states. Recovery from the network ultimately amounted to more than $100,000 distributed among 12 victim families. That evening, Derek sat at my kitchen table with James asleep in the carrier on the floor beside him, and he had the look of a person whose entire map of the last 4 years had just been handed back to him with everything in the wrong place. He said, "I don't understand any of it. I loved her." "I know," I told him. "That was real. Your side of it was real. The tragedy of people like her is that they are genuinely skilled at the parts that matter most. The warmth, the attentiveness, the way they make you feel chosen. They have to be. It's the only way the method works. What she did to you wasn't random. You were researched and selected because you were exactly the kind of person whose trust could be earned. That is not a weakness. That was someone weaponizing your decency." He asked what would happen to James. I told him, legal paternity was established, the birth certificate would be corrected, and we were going to figure out everything else one day at a time. I told him James would grow up knowing his father had fought for him, that his grandfather had fought for him, that some things cannot be taken from a family no matter how carefully someone tries. Carla Ann Prentice, who called herself Vanessa Calloway for 4 years, pled guilty to 11 federal counts of wire fraud, identity theft, and criminal conspiracy. 15 years in federal prison. Victor Huang received 22. At sentencing, she turned and looked at me from across the courtroom. She said, "There are others like me out there. You can't protect everyone." "Maybe not," I told her, "but I protected mine." Derek and James live in Tucson now, in the room that used to be my home office before I dismantled the surveillance equipment and put in a crib. James is walking. He calls me Grandpa with the full conviction of someone who has recently discovered that words are power, and when he says it, it doesn't sound like just a name. It sounds like something that was always supposed to be true. He will never remember any of this. And that is entirely the point. This story taught me something I should have already known after 27 years in a fraud unit. The people capable of the most sophisticated deception are almost never the ones who seem dangerous. They are warm. They remember details. They call on birthdays. They ask how the drive was. That is not a departure from the method. That is the method itself. And the best protection against it is not suspicion. Suspicion closes you off from real love, as well as false. The best protection is documentation. Attention, the willingness to ask uncomfortable questions when the shape of something feels wrong, even when the shape belongs to someone you desperately want to trust. I ask myself sometimes whether I would have caught this if I hadn't had the career I had. Whether a different grandfather, someone without the training, the contacts, the instinct for what a forged timestamp looks like from a hospital family lounge, would have just paid the bill, would have stayed hurt, would have let the months pass and the access deepen, and never known what was coming. Maybe. And that thought keeps me up sometimes, not with fear, with a quiet, stubborn sense of purpose. Because there are other families out there, other grandparents who drove a long distance and were turned away and don't know why. Other children whose futures are being written by people who see them only as leverage. I can't reach all of them, but I can tell this story. So here is what I genuinely want to know from you, and I mean this. Drop it in the comments right now. If you had been in my position, 16-hour drive, turned away at the hospital door, forged bill 4 days later, what would you have done? Type 1 if you think you would have paid the bill, kept the peace, and tried to move on. Type 2 if you would have reported the fraud but stayed out of the investigation and let the system handle it. Type 3 if you would have built the trap yourself. I'm not judging any answer. I genuinely want to know how you think. And tell me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. This channel reaches people in places I would never have expected, and I read every comment, every single one. If this story touched something in your own experience, a time when you were made to feel like an outsider in something that should have been yours, or when your instincts told you something was wrong and you were right, tell me below. I want to hear it. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. I tell these stories because they deserve to be told, because real experience, the messy kind, the kind that ends with your grandson calling you grandpa from a crib in your old home office that matters. That's worth an hour of someone's time. I'll be here next week with another one. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in Tucson and Chicago to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental.